Good morning. So we will be picking up where we left off in Job chapter 2, verses 11 through 13. And they read, Now when Job's three friends heard of all this adversity that had come upon him, each one came to his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. Don't ask me to say those again. Uh, for they had made an appointment together to come and mourn with him and to comfort him. When they raised their eyes from afar and did not recognize him, they lifted their voices and wept, and each one tore his robe and sprinkled dust on his head toward heaven. So they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his grief was great. So, just a quick recap. Chapter 1, we see this man who is a righteous man, blameless and upright before God, making sacrifices for perhaps his kids sinned against God and he was trying to atone for their sin. And we see this glimpse in heaven where the sons of God are presented before God, and Satan, also the adversary, comes and is speaking with God, and God asks him, "Where have you been?" He says, "To and fro, walking about the earth." And he says, "Have you considered?" This is what God says to Satan, the adversary. "Have you considered my servant Job?" And so we see in chapter 1, has everything taken from him possession wise. Uh, his animals, his field land, and his kids. And we see that he does not profane God in this. And he says, "Naked I've come in, naked I will leave, dust we were made, and dust we shall return. The Lord has decided to give, and he can take away, but blessed be the name of the Lord." And then we see a second glimpse into heaven where the sons of God and the adversary present himself before God. And this time, Satan says, "Well, if you let me, let's see, it says it right here. Da-da-da. Skin for skin is what Satan replies to the Lord. And he goes and attacks his body and makes boils appear on his head, from his head to the bottom of his feet. And we see Job trying to scratch the boils off with a potsherd. Um, and so in doing that, uh, he also had his wife come up to him and, "Do you still hold fast your integrity? And why don't you curse God and die?" These are the very things that God said to Satan, and then Satan also. And I just feel like we went over that. But anyway, so here we are after those scenes. And Job's three friends heard about the adversity that had come upon him, and these three friends made an appointment to come and to mourn with him and to comfort him. And I just would really want us to focus on the power of presence, because the fact that they heard of his affliction, they heard of his grief, the fact that they had a heart to actually go and be in the presence of Job really speaks to their involvement with Job and their relationship with Job. And I pull out of this, well, what is our involvement with others who are mourning around us? The New Testament says to mourn with those who mourn, right? The New Testament says to bear in each other's burdens, to strengthen the weak knees of others. And so they decided to come. And they didn't just love him by saying, "Oh, well, we'll be praying for you." They loved by their deed to come and see him and to mourn with him and to comfort him. Verse 12, and when they raised their eyes from afar and did not recognize him, they lifted their voices and wept, and each one tore his robe and sprinkled dust on his head toward heaven. So they're walking up to Job. They see Job sitting in these ashes, unrecognizable. Why? Because of the boils, because of the he was trying to scrape the boils off. So I think about a burn victim and how if you get burned very badly, they have to clean out the wounds and scrape the wounds so that infections don't take place. And it's very painful, and it it leaves a really bad scar. So this guy is bleeding. Job is bleeding. Job is like a leper. Job is not looking too good. He's in ashes. I mean, he is dirty. I mean, when someone has been crying, very heavy laden, their countenance really changes. And so the spirit of Job was just low, and so they didn't recognize him. They lifted up their voices and wept and tore the robe and sprinkled dust on his head towards heaven. I think about Jesus being transfigured because of the sin that was laid upon him on the cross. He was unrecognizable. His flesh was hanging off of his body, completely doused in blood. Um, just, just horrible. I don't know if anybody's seen The Passion of the Christ, but this is how I imagine and the imagery there of how he was beaten and what he had to endure for you and me. And the fact that they lifted up their voices and wept, they were crying out to God, and is how I see that. Lord, have mercy, have grace, right? Have Lord, be with him. This is my brother who's hurting and in pain, and he's unrecognizable in the pain that he's bearing. And Lord, please have mercy. And so, it doesn't say that, but that's how I imagine, because that's how I imagine I would be walking up to my brother or sister if I saw him or her in this regard. Someone that I love, someone that I cared for, to go see about. And each one of them tore his robe, sprinkled dust on his head towards heaven. So, fasting in sackcloth and ashes. It's a sign of humility. Verse 13, so they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. And no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his grief was great. And once again, we see the power of presence. Sometimes we minister by not even saying a word. Sometimes we minister by sending a text. Sometimes we minister by just telling someone we're thinking about them. And that's what these guys did. They shared the burden with Job. They sat there in ashes and dust for 7 days. We don't know if they didn't eat or they didn't drink. It doesn't really specify from where I've read. But I would assume here that this was a fasting and this was time of prayer, because Job was crying out to the Lord. And the fact that no one spoke a word, because they discerned that his grief was heavy. There's a point in time that sometimes there's nothing that we can say. Actually, sometimes the things that we do say can actually make a situation worse. So I find encouragement about the power of presence. And I don't know everybody's situation, but if there is someone in your life that you know is going through suffering, that you know is going through affliction, it's our call. We were called by God to share in the burdens of each other, carry the weight for each other. For iron to sharpen iron, a good word cheers the soul. Sometimes the power of presence and just being there for somebody during a time of need. The proverb says that a brother is born during a time of affliction. So sometimes, if there's someone in your life right now that the Lord is just bringing to your heart and mind, I would just encourage you to reach out to them. And sometimes it's going to be rejected, and sometimes it's going to be accepted. But don't be discouraged. Continue. God sent His disciples out 2 by 2 in the New Testament, so that when one is weak, the other is strong. Ecclesiastes talks about a 3-strand cord. 2 or more are gathered in my name. Christ says, I am in the midst. So strengthen your brother, strengthen your sister, reach out, be vulnerable with them, share in the burden with them. Try not to judge them, because if the shoe was on the other foot, we don't always know how we would hold up. So see ourselves rightly in this, and see yourself if you were suffering in this way. And that's what his friends did. Job's friends saw how Job was suffering, and they put themselves, because they loved him and cared for him, in his shoes. And so they mourned how he was mourning. And if we could do that better as the bride of Christ, I don't think we would have as many broken and defeated people. I think because we don't do this well, that the church has failed in a lot of ways. But that's not us. So just be encouraged. Reach out to the broken. Strengthen the weak knees of others. And remember, Paul said, I endure all things for the sake of the elect. This is not about you. But when Jesus, who is our high priest, can empathize and sympathize with us because he has been tempted in every way, this is how we should be towards others. Understanding our weakness, our frailty, our inability to sustain any sort of peace outside of the presence of Christ. And so if someone is struggling with that peace, let you who are mature usher in that peace to these people, to this person that the Lord has laid on your heart, and be a witness for Christ. Show them that you care. Show them not just by what you say, but by what you do. Let your actions and your words match. Walk in the likeness of Christ and be an encouragement. Y'all be blessed.